Hi, it's Ken. Welcome to this week's Frequently Asked Spiritual Questions video. If this is your first time here, I want to invite you to subscribe and click the bell so you'll be notified at the release of new videos. My focus in responding to your questions is to support your deepening experience and relationship with the divine. For this week, there were some comments that were submitted in response to one of my From My Heart emails. I'll link to the blog version of that email in the description below, so you can read it if you're interested in referencing it. And the first comment came from Anne, who said, as long as we think in terms of separate self, or what others refer to as ego, we will never truly understand or have the possibility of knowing the whole self. There is no separation, only misunderstanding. Thanks for submitting your perspective and comments here, Anne. Nivea said, you are getting too wordy. Simplify. What all need to be concerned about is peace on earth. Again, I appreciate the comment, Nivea. And Yanya said, my spiritual journey is necessarily from the standpoint of my ego or separate self, because from my whole self's point of view, I imagine, it's just being, resting in the infinite number of possible scenarios it has created, and looking at the separate self I think I am choosing, one or the other of those scenarios to be its reality in this moment or in that moment. There is no journey for the whole self. There is the awareness that one part of its consciousness has been limited to or imprisoned in the form called Yanya, and actually enjoys the experiences it virtually lives through my choices. But what's most important to my separate self in the spiritual journey is to find out how to have not just a fleeting experience of the state of being everything at once, but an ongoing one. And so to become what and who at some level I already know I am, but often can't experience. Even if I know that I got there, in no time at all, I would be wanting to have that limited experience again, where things actually happen and I can do something. So would reincarnate again, finding myself in a body that longs to be unlimited again. And on the circle goes, illustrating to perfection the saying, as above, so below, and as below, so above. Some very interesting comments here. I want to share a couple of things just by way of sharing my perspective to contribute to the dialogue that is unfolding around language. I want to suggest to you that language is not the origin of the illusion of separation. Language does not cause the illusion of separation. In fact, language itself, I want to suggest, is an artifact of the illusion of separation. If separation is gone, what is there to talk about? What is there to discuss? If we want to think of it this way, language no more causes separation than language causes gravity, for example. So I think that's an important thing to put out. There is a developmental perspective in consciousness here that I think is an important thing to sort of bring into this dynamic. In controlling consciousness, there is a strong emphasis placed on what is being held in awareness, as if those thoughts are creating the experience of reality. I want to suggest to you that that is true. Your thoughts do create reality up to a certain point. That's certainly true in controlling consciousness. But once we move into conduit consciousness, we've moved to a completely different perspective. And I want to suggest that your experiences are beyond actually your thoughts, or even beyond language. And once those begin happening, something radically different is taking place. The expression of divine presence as you is unfolding beyond the container of what we could call your conscious awareness. Certainly beyond your thoughts, beyond your intentions and all of that. And that's sort of one of the major points that goes into the choice to surrender, I would suggest. Certainly if you're surrendering before your final breath. Okay, next thing. I think there's a difference between the separate self and the ego. From my perspective, part of the ego is expressed through the separate self. But I also perceive that there is an expression of the whole self, of the ego through the whole self. I welcome a conversation about this, but I just wanted to toss that in to our exploration here and see where we run with that. I can say more if that's of interest. I've certainly written about it much more extensively in my first book. The other thing I want to say, and I'm actually going to link to a video that I had on the homepage of my website for a while about my interpretation of as above, so below. I think there are many, many different ways to interpret this, and I very much appreciate Yanya's perspective, as I do Anne's perspective and Nivea's perspective on this. I think one of the things that I am very tuned into is that as a spiritual teacher, there's a dilemma, a fundamental dilemma about how we address, or how I address or explore spiritual questions or a spiritual practice or a process. If we look at everything from the perspective of union consciousness, it's an entirely different perspective than that of victim consciousness or of controlling consciousness. And it is radically different as well from conduit consciousness. In fact, union consciousness, the final stage of the fourth stage of consciousness, has or contains within it the prior stages of consciousness: victim consciousness, controlling, and conduit. But at that point, they're fully integrated. So we now have received the gifts of the disempowered separate self, of the empowered separate self, and of the whole self. Another footnote here, a thought firing off. The other thing I would suggest to you is that it's my perception that it isn't just possible, but it is an aspect of our experiencing ourselves as we really are, that we fully experience our whole selves in this being, in this vessel, in your body, in your life. It's a fascinating perspective to think, as Yanya suggested, that the whole self is sort of beyond the expression in human form. That is to say, observing this experience that's going on by the separate self. It's my perception that the whole self is really who you are, not just on an energetic level, as if there were some way to differentiate between the energetic expression and the expression in form. I don't think there is. I'm suggesting that the complete energetic expression is, all I can think of, is expressed through, is made manifest through the physical form of your human body and being, your mind, and so on. And that one aspect of that whole expression I have been referring to as the separate self. Okay. So if we go back and try to talk about how are we going to explore spirituality, it seems to me that there isn't much to discuss, certainly not directly in union consciousness. What we have available to us in union consciousness, it seems to me, are really three expressions with language. One would be personal narrative. The other would be speaking in parable or in metaphor. There's no way to actually point directly to it, because at the point that we're in union consciousness, we are having an experience that is even deeper than the experience unfolding in conduit consciousness, and very much moving us beyond the limitation and framework and context of conventional language. So, it seems to me we have no choice but to explore in separation. We have no choice but to discuss the separate self and the whole self. And there's another reason for this as well. If we deny the experiences that we're having as human beings, we are effectively amplifying the trauma cycle of those aspects held in separation. That is to say, we're amplifying the denial or the incomplete expression of actual experiences that we have had in the body. It's as if we go through a traumatic experience in our life or lose a loved one and experience profound loss, but in an attempt to be spiritual, we deny that that ever happened, or the sadness that might be the very natural expression emotionally of being a human being. And so I'm very much an advocate for, rather than suppressing, allowing ourselves to fully express and feel what's coming up. Now, I would say this. I think it's very important not to become identified in separation, although developmentally, as we've explored in other videos, and certainly as I've written about extensively in the first book, at those early stages of consciousness, victim consciousness and controlling consciousness, there is no choice but to be identified with the separate self. In fact, it's not just that there's no choice, it is the appropriate and healthy developmental step for us to be taking. All right, let me take a step back and try to summarize this and simplify it at an even deeper level. We could say the truth is there's nothing for us to be concerned with. Not anything, not even peace on earth. For the truth of what actually is real is peace on earth, the peace of God, divine presence, the peace that surpasses all language, right? All of these references are referring to the ineffable presence that is within each of us, fully erupted already. And if we are to acknowledge not just the validity of our developmental journey, but also the validity of our experiences, of the choices we have made, of the way that we've lived our life, rather than isolating or insulating it, integrating it, coming to love it fully, each and every aspect of our lives. It does seem important to me to be able to acknowledge the reality of those experiences from those different developmental perspectives. At least that's how I see it. I'm so grateful to be connected with you in this way. If you have anything coming up as a result of watching and engaging with this video, I really encourage you to comment below and I'll join you there. If you have a question you'd like to submit for consideration for this series, there's a link in the description below. And of course, I really invite you to engage with the community on a deeper level by heading over to kenwstone.com and adding your name and email address to my newsletter. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And of course, if you haven't already, invite you to subscribe. Peace.